So at this point, we've just trimmed, measured out from our heel 3 centimeters and cut off the excess. Then folded the back piece in half, measured 3 centimeters up on either side, and I've gone ahead and done just a little snip as a marker because this is eventually going to be cut to make our heel. At this point, you turn it back inside out, and you can use the excess that we've cut off as a welt, or you can sew it without. Because we're using buffalo hide, it's quite thick, and trying to go through 3 layers of that would be quite difficult, so I'm going to do this without a welt. If you're using a thinner leather, you could absolutely use a welt. Like if we were using the deer hide, or if I had extra deer hide, I might use that as a welt with the buffalo. But given what I've got with me, I'm going to do it without. I've already tied my needle, and we're going to start doing our running stitch. So I'm going to go back through the base just below the cut that we made, and you can see how difficult it is to get through just the 2 layers of leather right now. So I'm glad I decided not to use a welt. Pull it all the way through, and you're going to want to go back. At this point, you are going to want to use doubled thread, even if you haven't been doing so before, because this is going to be the only thing holding the back of your moccasins together, so you want it to be nice and secure. So I'm going back through, and the same way I used my doubled thread to secure my stitching earlier, I'm going to go back through the knot that I've just made. If I can get to it. So in between the 2 threads that I've tied together. There you go. And that will keep our stitches nice and secure. Pull that tight. I've made my thread very long because I've had problems threading my needle, so I gave myself extra thread so that I would just have to cut and retie instead of rethreading. I'm going to do a back stitch, which I demonstrated earlier, but I'll do it again here. So you push it through, slowly but surely. And then instead of continuing forward, you go back on yourself to ensure that you're doubling over and being extra secure in your stitches. So that it comes through, it's kind of hard to see here, but it comes through back halfway through the stitch that we've just made. And you continue on like that until you get to the top. Then you tie off and cut your thread, and then we'll move on to turning the heel at the base. Alright, so now that you've gone and done your running stitch or back stitch all the way up, it should look something like this. If you've done a back stitch, it'll be a relatively solid line like that. If you've done a running stitch, it might have a couple more spaces in it, but that's totally fine. As you can see, this side looks way nicer. Now, finishing off, I've just done my last stitch coming through this way and back. And because of the way that I tie off, I've left, as you can see, some excess thread on this side. So I'm going to pull this all the way through. Make sure I'm pulling it tight. Now because I've given myself so much excess thread, I've been having some difficulty. So if you're doing that as well, just beware that will happen. And you can see that loop has just pulled tight because I was pulling it through. So I'm just gonna loop under that and pull through. Now the way that I like to tie off for like a final tie is I will pull the side that's just gone through the fabric tight and leave a bit of a loop still, and then start to tighten that off so that the loop gets smaller and smaller. And then I will loop back through the thread again so that it makes the equivalent of a double knot, and you pull that through. It's kind of confusing and hard to see because my thread is so long and loopy. But as you pull that tight, it will secure on itself, and then you have this really nice, tight, clean knot that you can cut. Now, just give that a quick trim, and there you have it, the back of your moccasins. Now, the next step is actually creating the heel. So I'll get you to look back at those little snips that we made earlier. Okay, and we are going to take our ruler and measure 3 centimeters again from that point, going back in towards the toe of the moccasin. So if I line that up at my 3 centimeter mark and mark that off there, okay, and draw along the line of the ruler so that you have something that looks like that. Again, pretty vague on the camera, if it would focus. Thank you. So, but you can see it. It's clear enough to cut. And do the same on the other side. Oh, and of course my pencil has just broken. Okay, so you are going to cut along those lines, and then I will show you how to do the next step. Okay, at this point, your moccasin should look a little something like this. As you've got your heel sewn and folded inside out, you've just marked and trimmed that 3 centimeter line in from our original mark. Okay, so you should, after cutting through both layers of leather, it should look something like that. So that if you want to see what this will look like, you turn your heel back inside out and flatten out that piece that you've just cut. We're going to be sewing these 2 pieces together, so it creates a nice flat heel like that. Okay, now this step will be done differently depending on whether or not you are using a welt. If you are not using an external piece of leather as the welt, but you would like to use a welt, I feel like I'm saying welt way too many times, you fold the flap out and then sew these 2 together, again from the inside, so that all your stitching is on the inside and you won't see it once it's a finished product. But you will sew through this layer of leather, the folded part of the heel, so that it looks something like that on the other side, and this layer. And then when you turn it out, you will have to, the same as we're going to do up here with this piece of leather, this top welt, you'll have to stretch this and trim this off. Now again, because I'm using such thick leather, I can't do that. So I am just going to keep this piece of leather on the inside and do my running stitch through the 2 layers like this. If you were using an external piece, say this other piece of leather that I've got here that I'm using for my other moccasin, you would trim this and put your welt on the inside like this and line up the edges, sew them, and then again you would have this excess piece on this side that you would have to trim. Okay, so choose the way that you'd like to do that depending on what leather you have and what materials you've got available. Like I said, I'm going to be leaving mine with just the 2 layers. So I get my needle and I'm going to start on this outside because it's easier to see my line that I'm going to be sewing through. And I'm going to start it off right towards the corner, push it through, and start doing my running and or back stitch, whichever one you're going to do. Then you go all the way across the exact same way that we went across this piece, trim whatever excess leather you've got depending on how you're sewing it together, and then we will move on to sewing our liner and trimming this top welt. All right, at this point you will have finished your sewing, either regular running or back stitch, and you will have the back part of your heel sewn and the bottom part of your heel sewn, and this is where you will trim the welt. Like I said before, where you'll be trimming and what you'll be trimming will vary based on how you've decided to sew them together. But for me, given the way that I attached my heel, I'm just going to trim this extra fabric on the inside, and because it's on the inside, it doesn't have to be absolutely flawless because nobody's gonna see it ever. It's more important to really stretch the fabric and cut the welt really, really close to the hem if it's on the outside like this piece is. Then, once you've trimmed that, you pop it inside out, and there you have it, your beautiful moccasin heel. Now at this point I'm going to go around and, just like I said to do on the heel, really stretch the fabric back and trim the welt all the way around. And then we will take our lining or liner templates and cut our liner pieces from our fleece, and sew them together.